Hello, everybody. In this episode, we're going to get into episode 5 called the Berghof Set. And this episode basically deals with Hitler and his henchmen and all of the people that were around him, basically starting from 1935 all the way up to 1938, 1939. So, last episode, we covered 5 years. We were on a 5 year streak. And in episode 4, we basically covered 1933 to 1938. In this episode, we cover around 3 to 9 years, which is basically the construction of the Berghof Set, which is this mountainous region in Bavaria that Hitler liked, and they would even call it like the second seat of government for Nazi Germany. So again, they basically say that there was a lot of infighting. Hitler's henchmen or the people that were around Hitler were biting for power. They wanted more of it. They were they had like deep hatred for each other, which I don't think. Again, maybe they're exaggerating or maybe it was true. I'm not justifying it, but I am saying like at those levels of power, who isn't really having rivalries and infighting, right? I know these were horrible people, but again, I think they're trying to make them seem worse than they were, or at least I'm not really seeing the evidence here because at one point, if you guys remember last episode, they talk about how Goebbels was basically in bad standing with Hitler because of his affair, because he cheated on his wife Magda. But then here they talk about how he was like basically praised by Hitler because he put on like these spectacles and these shows. More so when they invaded countries, like when they went into Austria and the Rhineland. So that's pretty interesting because the Rhineland was a German territory that could not be occupied by German soldiers due to the Treaty of Versailles back in 1918, I guess, 1918, 1919, when World War One ended. So again, I think they're just like, they were like Goebbels hated Himmler, Himmler hated Goering, Goering hated Bormann. There's this other guy called Martin Bormann. He comes into the scene. So let's get into it. We're in 1935, and Nazi Germany's trying to expand all throughout Europe. And they basically say that Rudolf Hess is a loser. So if you guys remember, Rudolf Hess has been out of the scene for a couple episodes now. He goes from being Hitler's first disciple, loyal right hand man, to from being in prison and helping him write My Struggle, Mein Kampf, to basically being casted out. Now, I don't really know why this happens. The documentary doesn't really go into specifics as to why Hitler casts him out. I think that's disloyal if he did do it without any apparent reason. They're basically just saying that Rudolf has started to lose credibility within the Nazi party and the Nazi members. Basically, like, anybody that they could throw out of the inner circle, they would just basically throw them out. So I guess that's why Rudolf Hess, in this case, becomes like a loser. Okay, so anyway, Hitler may have manipulated. Oh, yeah, and this is something that I thought about from last episode, where I mentioned that they say that Hitler manipulated his henchmen. One way I was thinking, like, how did he do that? One way in which he could have done it was by him manipulating the Goering's Goebbels rivalry, more so by putting Goering in charge of Prussia, right? So he puts him in charge of the biggest German state, Prussia, and then that's when he has that rivalry with Goebbels because Goebbels wants control of Prussia's radio broadcast system, and Goering doesn't want to give it to him. But Goebbels already had last episode like power of the whole radio broadcast system in Germany, except for that state, Prussia, which was the biggest state. So maybe he manipulated that. I'm not really sure. By giving Goering's Prussia, or maybe it was a military strategic decision to give Prussia to Goering. But anyway, we find ourselves in this whole episode in the Bavarian Alps, which are these beautiful mountainous regions in Germany. And Hess is deputy Führer in 1935. But then what basically ends up happening is that Hitler asks for a Berghof, which is like an a mountainous court, and they say yes. Hess was Hitler's yes man. He was very like there for Hitler, but all of these members are like fighting one another. Which I said was kind of like in the real world, and Rudolf Hess is given the task to build this second seat of government, but they say Rudolf Hess is more of an ideas man. So he basically gets tasked with refurbishing Hitler's house, and he delegates this, right? He's like, no, I'm a thinker, I'm not a doer, and he gets his deputy, which is Martin Bormann, to do this. So then Martin Bormann all of a sudden gets put as this guy who's there and who's really ambitious, sees this opportunity to start working close with Hitler and to build his like dream house, I guess, in the mountains. Um, but what Hess ends up doing is an accidental transfer of power. So then Berman, he steps in, he steps up to the plate, and he's an organizer. They say he's a go-to man, but he's not really sophisticated. He's more of a thug and a bully. Like he bullies people to get his way. That's how he gets things done. And he's a quiet man. He's not, like Goering, like the socialite, or like Goebbels or Hitler, right? But he wants to get into the center of power, and he also has photographic memory, so he remembers everything he sees or he hears from people, right? And Bormann, in this case, understands how much Hitler loves Bavaria, and they basically turn the house Wachenfeld into this like big mansion where now they're gonna be having like administrative offices. They have people over, foreign ministers. They have the King of England over at one point, Benito Mussolini also from Italy. Um, and then I'm not really sure because last episode I was like, people aren't really with it, people are with it, people aren't really with it. So I think the narrators, the historians, kind of go back and forth on this point during these times, because at this point they say the people are with it, they're liking the Nazi Party, because even the people that aren't like the supporters of the Nazi Party, they're still like seeing unemployment fall, the economy is all right. And in March 1935, the first television broadcast, is done. So then Germany, or the Third Reich, and TV are kind of seen as like these modern, they want the Third Reich to be seen as modern, and TV helps them like get there, right? So we're back to the Bavarian Alps. And Bormann, in this case, he needs more land. So this is just an example of how he was a bully. He goes to the neighboring like hotel and basically says, "We need you guys to get out, sell and get out." Excuse me. And the neighbors don't want to. Um, so then the neighbors get sent, which they show is like a couple. They get sent to the Cow, which is in Munich, the first concentration camp, I think, by Himmler, the Cow concentration camp. And he gets his way, right? He gets that land, and then they expand. I think it was like 26 square kilometers of land that was here in the Bavarian Alps for the Third Reich for Hitler. And then Albert Speer comes into the scene. So Albert Speer is a young architect who works in the Nuremberg rallies, these big rallies that they have every year to honor the Nazi Party. And Hess basically again sends him to Hitler, right? So this is like the second mistake he makes by basically delegating not only the task but delegating the power, right? Because ultimately Albert Speer is an architect in charge of designing an eagle for the Nuremberg rallies, I think, and he basically is like, yeah, you go talk. So he's like, you go talk to Hitler. But at this point, I'm thinking two things. First, I'm thinking that either Hess is getting tired of like working directly with Hitler. He's probably just like, yeah, just you go figure it out. You go talk about the eagle with him. Like, I don't want to have to be going to Hitler for every little thing, right? And then the other thing that doesn't really make sense is that Hess has been with Hitler for like 12 years now, right? Ever since 1933 in prison, 1923, all the way to 1935. So did they just get bored with each other? Did Hitler start hating on him? Was Hess tired of working with Hitler? Because they kind of show Hess as like this weak, quiet man who just basically gets pushed out of the inner circle, by accident. Like he didn't really do anything, but just because of his lack of will and social skills and charisma, I guess, he just gets pushed out. Um, but then again, I'm like, why, like, why does this happen? Was there like some type of just fed up with each other? Like they just started distancing themselves. Um, and well, what Albert Speer eventually does, kind of like Martin Bormann, is that Albert Speer becomes Hitler's architect, and they design this like eagle, right, for the Nuremberg rallies. And he also has this idea of like the searchlights. The first time I saw this docu series, I thought that the one in charge of the searchlights was Goebbels, but it was actually Albert Speer. So it's the searchlights are these lights that shine up, and they basically shine up to the sky. They look like columns. They say like Roman columns, and that was Albert Speer's idea. So again, like a sign of Nazi propaganda in this case, and he has this idea because he sees that they do this in America. So then, but he has a problem. Goering doesn't want to lend him the lights because he's in charge of the Luftwaffe, which is like the Air Force, the Nazi Air Force. And he has those searchlights, but they're for military operations, and he doesn't want to. But Speer basically doesn't care. He goes over Goering to Hitler, and then Hitler agrees, and he has to give them up, right? So they can use them, and yeah, they start using that as Nazi propaganda. Hess is late to notice all of these like power moves that his people are basically doing, like Bormann and Speer. And the Berghof project basically is almost finished at this point. Hitler is impressed by the project, and Goering is worried in this case. He basically spends this episode worried with Hitler's like invasions. Like the first one is the seas of Rhineland. Rhineland is this territory on the west coast of Germany that ever since World War One, German soldiers were banned from entering, from occupying. So there hasn't been soldiers there since 1918. But in 1936, Hitler occupies it. He ignores the Treaty of Versailles, basically. And Goering worries about the Allies, right? He's like, whoa, like the Allies, like you got to be careful, right? And he also thinks it's unnecessary to be invading, kind of like what I was thinking, right? Like, what was the objective of this? And I was thinking about this. I asked ChatGPT, and I think I had asked them before, like, why did the Nazi Empire want to expand itself, and how far did they want to get? Um, how far did they want to get? I don't know. I got to ask. But I do know that one of the reasons that mostly makes sense to me, besides all the other racist stuff and ideological stuff, is that they needed resources to basically feed like their empire, right? So they figured that by expanding, outward, gaining territory and resources, they would be like better equipped to feed and to maintain their German power and authority, right? Which is it's what's it called? It has a name for that. There's a name, Lebensraum or something like that, which is like the something of free space, something to do with that. So anyway, Goering gets ignored, and Goering doesn't understand Hitler, right? At this point, Hess is not informed of the takeover of Rhineland. The first two territories they take over, I guess, is Rhineland and Austria, right? Now, I'll go back to Austria in a moment because it doesn't make sense. That last episode, they say they had already invaded Austria in 1933, but then they go back again in 1938, right? But anyway, he's not informed, and Goebbels now needs to sell the Nazi dream. So they're saying, yeah, on March 7, 1936, they march into Rhineland. Since 1918, they take over that, and they say it's the Nazis' first move, like military move, and Goebbels is good. So I was like, but what about the whole Magda Goering beef? Like, how come he's good all of a sudden? I guess this may have happened before because it did happen in 1936, and they say that he was with Lydia Barbara since 1936, and he got found out later. So they kind of jump all over the place with this one and last episode, because they supposedly covered the last 5 years, 1933 to 1938, but in this one they go back to 1935, and now they're, it's like we're going through these last 3 4 years again. But it may have been because last episode they talked about anti-Semitism, and in this one they're talking like about the elite Nazi group, right? Um, okay, so anyway, they march into Rhineland, and Goering and Hess are basically not on good terms at this point with Hitler. Bormann is, because he basically gets the Obersalzberg done, the mountain court, I guess in 1936. So they have like school children over. This is the part where I was talking about earlier. Foreigners are invited. Edward the Eighth, King of England, and Mussolini from Italy, and they build like this underground fortress that can fit up to 1,000 people in case the Nazis have to make like a last stand. But I guess they're like, yeah, but there was no talk of last stands, because in 1936, in the summer of 1936, everything was all good at the HQ, at the headquarters. Um, and I guess in this case, they say that Hitler woke up late. He went to bed late. Whenever he had people over at this retreat, he liked to like talk for hours, like I guess until 3 4 in the morning, like giving these rants, and people just had to listen to him, and they were bored, I guess. And they say that Hitler liked to run Germany from his living room, but it was the best of times, I guess, because they say, like it was all good. They were almost at the zenith of their power, at the height of their power. But you had to spend time like listening to Hitler till 3 a.m. He gets up late, and everyone's trying to suck up to Hitler. And this is the part where they say like everyone is hating on each other, everyone's competing for power. It's Bormann versus Goering and all these people, which is again like the part where I'm kind of like, what? But okay, I guess, you know, if you say that's what was happening. Hitler's cool with the kids, and they show like pictures and videos of him, like, like being there with kids. And Bormann, at this point, he's the master of ceremonies, and they say he's really the de facto person in charge of the Berghof Set. And then they say that Bormann does this master stroke where he takes charge of a local children's home, which was like overseeing the Berghof. And that's how he makes like a master stroke, because he's able to rely on himself instead of other people's reports on what's happening at the Berghof, which I guess is all right, but I wouldn't really call it like a master stroke. And this is where they start plotting like the solution to the Jewish problem, quote unquote. So they mention how they're sophisticated yet racist, which is kind of like a paradox, I guess. How they're like intellectuals and intelligent people, but they're racist. Um, and Hitler here, Bormann basically takes charge of Hitler's finances, and he decides who gets what. So he's basically like the party's treasury. So he climbs up the rank like really fast, I guess. And they say that Hess is notably missing from most of the Berghof like events and videos that are archived, I guess, archived. Um, and then they say that Hess is not a clubbable figure, so he's not a figure that you would see like in a club. He becomes hypochondriac, which I thought was interesting because he is a Taurus, and maybe I'm thinking Tauruses have a tendency to be hypochondriac. So he's just developing all these illnesses for himself. And then they talk about a weird thing, which I didn't really found it to be weird, but they say how Goering tells Hess about his problem that he has, which is he has neuralgia, which is I guess like nerve pain. And then Hess sends Goering like a bunch of pots and pans, telling him like, like fill these pots and pans with water and basically soak your body in it at different temperatures. And I guess they say that that was super weird, which I don't find it to be weird. I mean, again, these were horrible people, but they were just gifts, and he was trying to help him out. So I don't really think that was like weird. They draw him out to be like this sicko and this like weird outcast, like loser person. But I don't know. I don't really find that to be weird. Sending a person like gifts, but okay, especially if you're like that powerful and that rich, which they probably all were. But they say Hess is insecure, but Hess is useful, right? So it's kind of like contradicting themselves throughout this documentary. Hess is useful in Austria, where the Nazi Party has been banned. So I was like, wait, I thought they had already taken over Austria, but no. So there's a failed attempt on March 12, 1938, to take over the power, to take over Austria. And basically, Goering comes in here. He puts an Air Force display. No shots are fired, and they take over Austria in 1938 militarily. So they call it diplomacy backed up by force. And Austrians are happy. They welcome it, just like in Rhineland. Back home, he's like a rock star. He's rock star popular. So Hess laid the groundwork, they say, but they don't explain how he laid the groundwork, just the fact that he has like some connections. But he's not good with Hitler. Again, I don't know why at this point, and I doubt Hitler was like, yo, you're just weird. Like, I don't like you, because like I'm sure he didn't like a lot of his henchmen, but not maybe he thought that he was useless. That could be like a better argument, and maybe that's why he just started casting him out. I don't know. But yeah, basically he's not with Hitler in Austria when Hitler gives his speech, right? And again, they bring in Himmler. They talk about how he brings the terror to Austria on defenseless civilians. Himmler is not really talked about, but this is basically what they already explained last episode. How they, they imprison Jews and they take their property and they experiment in Austria. They experiment in Austria because eventually, excuse me, that experimentation with like the Jewish people would eventually be what would happen in Germany, right? And I guess Goering and Hitler celebrate together in Germany. Hitler and Speer are developing the heart of the capital. So they're thinking like, Speer is the architect. They're thinking big domes, big arches. They want to rename, Hitler wants to rename Berlin Germania. And Speer and Hitler basically egg each other on. They're talking about how they're both idealists, but they insinuate more that they're not, that they're not realists, that they're like dreamers only, or simply, right? Okay, now Speer, they talk about how he's the only one that can bypass Bormann at this point, so he's super tight. He's like Hitler's BFF, I guess, at this point, because they both think alike, and Bormann feels threatened. He also feels threatened by Eva Braun. This is the first mention of Eva Braun, which was Hitler's mistress, and Bormann can't interfere with her either. And Eva Braun was, I guess, an assistant to Hitler's official photographer, but she's been Hitler's mistress for 6 years, since she was 17. She smokes, she's outgoing, and Hitler doesn't like it. So Eva is very different with Hitler than without Hitler. And they say that they keep her a secret from the German people because it would be bad for Hitler's PR, like public relations image, right? Because I guess he's like a rock star. But this for me was kind of interesting because I'm like, well, nowadays if a politician wants to get elected or wants to like become a leader, governor, president, they literally need to have a wife, right? Like people will get married just to be in that position of power, and then when they get off of power, when they come down from power, they get divorced, right? I've seen that. So in this case, Hitler didn't really, that would look bad because I guess he was like a rock star with the ladies too. I don't know. But yeah, she's kept a secret, and it's basically Braun versus Bormann. The wives are jealous of her, the husbands, they look down on Eva because they're like, yeah, who the hell is she? Emmy Goering comes in, which has been married to Goering. They didn't even mention this since 1935, and she likes to think of herself as the woman of the Third Reich. So they just talk about how like everyone's basically hating on each other, everyone hates each other, yet they're all there, which again to me feels kind of exaggerated, but sure, okay. And then they talk about how Goebbels gives a pearl necklace to Eva at one point, but it backfires because Hitler doesn't like to see Eva with pearls because superstition. Hitler thinks pearls are bad luck, I guess. And in 1938, the Anschluss, which is the annexation of Austria, is complete. Um, and then they set their eyes on Sudetenland, which is in Czechoslovakia, and it's because that land, that western part of Czechoslovakia is has a lot of German people in it. So then Goebbels needs to come up with an excuse as to why invade. They say at one point, if Hitler wanted the moon, Goebbels would be the one that would get in an astronaut suit and find a reason why to go to the moon, which I thought was funny. So he's in charge of foreign policy a lot. And he portrays the Germans as victims and Germany as like the protector, right? Like we're here to protect the people that, all of this made up, obviously. And Goering urges caution again. So Goering is like, why are we doing this? Let's not do this. Let's not mess around with the Allies. Um, but yeah, they do it like I mentioned for the resources. On October 1st, 1938, they invade that like western land called Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, and 6 months later they take over more of Czechoslovakia, which to me would have been an immediate red flag. Like, what the hell are you doing? Like, you said you needed to take over this land for the German people. Why are you just like taking over more land just because? That immediate red flag in 1939 at this point. So now we're in spring of 1939. Goering, for the first time, is losing power, they say, and he turns to an addiction, to an old habit, morphine, and he takes it again due to dental issues. He gets prescribed, but again, like, he's doing this again, and like all of a sudden he starts losing power. His reputation seesaws, they say. And on April 20th, 1939, it's Hitler's 50th birthday. So he has Austria, he has Czechoslovakia. He's been able to get those territories with no bloodshed. He has the biggest empire since the Kaiser. So all these people are like giving them gifts, the best way they know. Goebbels puts on the biggest display ever. Goering flies planes back and forth. Yeah, like all these people just do a bunch of stuff. They give him like a bunch of gifts. But Bormann gives him a mountaintop, like a little house, which the Allies would later call the Eagle's Nest. But then Hess comes back in the picture, and they're like, yeah, but Hess is superseded by all of them. Obviously, he's not there. He's not happy. Everyone else is having the time of their life. But then they say they say how he's going to develop this radical idea for the European mainland, which is going to lead to one of the most bizarre episodes of World War II. Again, I don't recall this. I'm not sure if they're talking about the invasion of Poland or something else. But I am interested to see what it is. So that's all I got for this episode review. I thought it was interesting how they, showed they have like a lot of video footage of all of them at the Berghof. Yeah, but all the politicking, I think maybe there was a lot of politicking, but I think they say things that you just can't be sure about. Like all the women were jealous. Like, are there like registers of that? Or I guess they have a lot of diaries, so maybe through the diaries. But it would be nice to see some evidence, like, oh yeah, look at this diary from one of the Nazi members' wives who was saying like Eva Braun is like shouldn't be there, and I'm so jealous. But yeah, they just basically, like, it's kind of like superficially done, I guess. And this episode kind of took me off guard with the date jumping around. Maybe I'm wrong from last episode. Maybe I took my notes wrong. Now I'm checking out because I had a mistake here with the spring 1936, which was actually spring 1939 when Goering starts to lose power. So I could have been off, but I'm pretty sure it was 1933. And there was a political influence takeover of Austria in 1933. So maybe they got the date wrong. I would have to go back and check. Let me know if you know. I'm talking, of course, about episode 4, I think. Yeah, because that's when they talk about, episode 4, March 1939, in the rise of anti-Semitism. So anyway, let me know, and I'll see you in the next one, all right? Peace.